Hi, and welcome to my channel. Or if you're a returning subscriber, hi again. It's so nice to see you back here for another video. My name is Tess Lark, and today I'm going to show you how you can use epoxy resin, some gold leaf, and alcohol ink to create a really lovely 3D bloom effect. As always, I'll have all the materials that I used for this project linked in the description down below, and let's just hop into today's project. This mold holds approximately 80 milliliters of resin, but because I'm going to be pouring some of my resin into a cup to mix it with some white and make pigmented resin, and I'll be losing a little bit of resin in that process just because of the resin that stays in the cup, I went ahead and I started by mixing 100 milliliters, and I'm just pouring roughly 20 milliliters or so of that into a separate cup so I can mix in some alcohol ink. And the alcohol ink I'm using today is by Pinata Colors. It's their Blanco Blanco, or their white. Whenever you're working with alcohol inks, it's a good idea to give them a nice shake before you add them to your resin, just to make sure that the pigment is really well incorporated, because sometimes it can settle at the bottom. After I've added a few drops of white to my resin, I'm going to take a clean popsicle stick and begin mixing that, making sure that that alcohol ink is really thoroughly incorporated, and scraping both the sides and the bottom of my cup as I go. Now that I have my white resin, I'm going to go ahead and put that in a sandwich baggie that I'll be using as a piping bag. So I've just taken another clean empty cup and used that to put my plastic bag into. Before transferring my resin over, I'm going to hit it with the heat gun to pop any bubbles that are forming at the surface, and then I'm going to carefully pour all of that resin into my open sandwich baggie. After I've poured the majority of my resin out of my cup, I'm going to use my popsicle stick to scrape the sides and the bottom of the cup to make sure I've got all of that white resin in there before taking the bag out of the cup, kind of getting all of that resin to one side, and I'll close this bag up and leave it to the side to use a bit later. And just a quick reminder, if you are finding this video helpful so far and you're finding it useful, please don't forget to give it a like. It not only helps out my channel a whole lot, but it also lets me know I'm making content that you guys want to see from me. My next step will be to fill up my mold using the remainder of my clear resin, and I'm going to make sure that I leave just a little bit of space because I will be adding a bit more of resin in the form of the white resin, and I don't want to overfill this mold. Once I've filled my mold with clear resin, I'm going to take a moment and use my heat gun on the higher setting and pop any of those bubbles that may be forming on the surface. After I pop my surface bubbles, it's going to be time to add my pigments. And I'm using all alcohol ink by Pinata Colors. I'm using their Baja Blue, the Sun Bright Yellow, and the Lime Green. But before I add my pigment, I'm going to take some gold leaf to make the center of my flower. I've got a very small piece of gold leaf here, and I'm just using my fingers to break that up into even smaller little pieces, and I'm adding that into a 1 ounce measuring cup. After I've got the gold leaf broken up enough and I feel like it's pretty much the right shape and consistency, I'm going to add just a little bit of resin to that. But I'm adding such a little amount of resin that I'm just going to drip it off of the end of a popsicle stick, because I want my gold leaf to end up being a bit of a paste so that it stays in the center of the resin instead of spreading out throughout the entire piece. I can always add a little bit more resin if I think that it needs it, but I'd like to avoid adding more gold leaf. And you can see how it's kind of sticking together on the edge of my popsicle stick, and that's perfect to use. So next I'm just going to cut a very small hole in that sandwich bag that I'm using as a piping bag for my white resin, and once again I'm just going to set that off to the side on some paper towels. And I'm setting this down on paper towels because now that it's open it's going to leak quite a bit. So first step, I'm going to put some gold in the center of my coaster, and that's going to act as the center of my flower. Just pressing that down a little bit and spreading it out just a little bit because I want it to take up a little bit of space. Next, I'm going to begin to layer in my colors, starting with the yellow and then moving to the blue. And then finally, I'll be adding some green, just kind of making sure that there's not too much negative space, but also keeping in mind that the alcohol ink does spread out quite a bit. Once the mold is fully pigmented, I'm going to take my white resin and begin to make a swirl in the piece, starting from the center and moving to the outside. I really love this technique because you don't get little blobs in the finished piece. Before, I would make some concentric circles and then draw those into the center. I think this is much easier, faster, and you get a better result. Now that I've made a swirl throughout my piece using that white resin, I'm going to take a clean popsicle stick and draw those lines in from the outside to the center, ending with a little swirl. And next, I'll cover this piece up and let it cure completely before moving on to the next step. Because I want the foreground and the background layers to be clearly defined, I let this piece set up overnight, so for about 24 hours, and then I mixed up another 100 milliliters of clear resin. I'm gonna need much less for this, but I am working on a couple different projects today, so I mixed up a bit extra. To that, I'm adding some alcohol ink. It is the Pinata Colors Mattia Black, as well as some mica powder by Arteza. It's their Space Gray, which just gives a really lovely sort of metallic finish to the finished product. So I'm mixing that into my resin, making sure that I'm scraping both the sides and the bottom as I go. And after I mix my resin, I do like to let it sit off to the side for a minute. You can see how those air bubbles are raising to the surface, and then I can easily pop them with my heat gun before moving on. My next step will be to pour that black resin onto the back of my coaster. So I'm just doing this slowly, making sure that I'm working from a high, small stream, again to pop any bubbles as they're coming down. And this footage is sped up, but I don't want to completely fill this mold. I just want to make sure that it's full enough that all of the edges and all of the back of this piece are covered. So I'm hitting that with my heat gun to warm it up a little bit, and I'll be using a bit of gravity just to make sure that all of these edges are completely filled in. I'll also use my popsicle stick to sort of drag that resin towards the edge of the mold and make sure that all of those little nooks and crannies are filled in as well. So just sort of gently moving that resin all the way to the outside and hitting it with my heat gun to make sure that the resin is nice and warmed up and easy to move before sort of tilting it around and making sure that I have a really nice even background layer of color. And then once again, I'll let this piece cure completely before moving on. Okay, so I went ahead and I let this piece cure overnight. It's totally solid and ready to pop it out of the mold, so let's go ahead and see how it turns out. From the front, it's looking really cool, so I'm really excited to pop this out. Oh my gosh. This one is so stunning. I really think that the black background on this was a great choice because it really makes those lighter colors pop. And there's so much depth and dimension to this piece. I'll make sure to take some footage of it in the natural light so you guys can see it a little bit better. But overall, I am so happy with this piece. Let me know if you guys want to see a coaster set of these in the comments below, because I definitely think that I want to make some things like this that I can add to my Etsy shop. I also really love how the gold leaf came out as the center of the flower. I think it's absolutely stunning. And I would love to know your thoughts in the comments down below. As always, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for spending part of your day with me, especially if you made it all the way to the end of this video. And if you did make it all the way to the end, leave me some sort of food related comment or emoji in the comments down below just to confuse anyone who hasn't made it this far. And I'll see you in the next video.